How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, live today on April 29th. The NFL Draft is officially behind us. There was a lot of surprises and a lot of good picks, a lot of questionable picks, a lot of things we could go into this week, starting off with my favorite draft classes from this past weekend. Which teams did I believe had the strongest outcomes after rounds 1 through 7? Then later on today's show, we're going to talk more about the Atlanta Falcons pick of Michael Penix and more on what their general manager said and more on what Raheem Morris said as well on that decision. And breaking news today just around the NFL, Ezekiel Elliott making his way back to the Dallas Cowboys. I'll go into the contract details and my thoughts overall on that situation at the running back position over there in Dallas. So a lot of interesting stuff to cover on today's episode. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. And before I jump into the first segment, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. Using this link, I'm able to see your question pop up in my chat box, and I can read your question out loud and potentially carry the conversation elsewhere and just get your guys' feedback on whatever I have to say on that topic. It's a big help for this show, and we greatly appreciate it anytime you guys are able to do that with any question or comment. So again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. And that being said, I can go into my best draft classes from this past weekend, starting off, as you can see, with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I tried not to be biased. I mentioned it on this show already. I'm a Steelers fan, and I thought last year when Omar Khan took over and that draft class, bringing in Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., among others, I thought that was a very strong draft class, a very, very good opening scene for a new general manager, very impressive. And then this year, they just knocked it out of the park once again, really, by drafting and just really addressing all the positions that I thought were of biggest need. That's really the overachieving goal and main thing I want to take away from the draft. How I evaluate a good draft is by teams going in and addressing the positions that they need and leaving the NFL draft having answered more questions that then still remain. You don't want to come away from the draft still thinking, oh, we need this, this, and this, and almost feeling like you didn't address anything. I think the Steelers hit it on the head right away, like you see there on your screen. Drafting tackle Troy Fautanu, center Zach Frazier, and Roman Wilson and Peyton Wilson among the most notable picks that I really thought were steals really overall, especially Roman Wilson and Peyton Wilson. Roman Wilson, coming from a very established program, very successful in college, had a very solid year as well. 12 touchdowns, ran a 4.3 40 at the NFL Combine. You saw at the Senior Bowl, if you were following, any activity there from the teams, that Mike Tomlin especially was very engaged with Roman Wilson, watching him from very close on all his drills and stuff like that. They were very close in that. And it just always seemed like there was that connection there. They ended up taking him in the third round. And I thought the way it all fell, the board, I thought there was no way Roman Wilson was going to be there. He was. The Steelers took no time in choosing him, and now he ends up there in Pittsburgh. But really the two first picks, addressing the left tackle and center, was massive for the Steelers because they've had struggles with the offensive line, protecting their quarterbacks and establishing a run game. That's a big point that they wanted to emphasize this year. And with Troy Fautanu, nobody thought he would be there, but because the Falcons selected Michael Penix, it slid everybody down a few spots, and because of that, the Steelers were able to get their guy, as well as Zach Frazier, one of the top 3 centers in the draft. At 51, the Steelers not having to move around at all really just makes this an overachieving draft class as well. And Peyton Wilson as well, same story. Arguably, talent-wise and physical attributes, one of the best in college football, was the Chuck Bednarik recipient of the best defensive player in all of college football and the Butkus Award for the best linebacker. The main concerns around him were the injuries and his ACL, not actually having an ACL and shoulder surgery. But all that aside, the Steelers felt comfortable with his medical. And if you put that to the side, this guy's a great talent out of North Carolina State. Had a very good season just overall in the stats with no ACL, 138 tackles, 6 sacks, and 3 interceptions. If you just ignore the medicals, and that's a very hard thing to do, it's a lot easier said than done, this guy probably doesn't make it out of the second round. But because of that, the Steelers could have had one of the biggest steals in the draft. And overall, I think not really making any trades, getting all these guys at their picks, has them being one of my favorite draft classes in the entirety of the NFL draft. And in saying that, I'm able to move on to my next team here, which is the Philadelphia Eagles. Mostly the same story around them, not really having to move around. I mentioned the Eagles and their general manager, Howie Roseman, being really known for moving around, trading up, and getting the guys that they want, not really being content with staying still. And the two most notable picks for them are Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Not just because they're great players, projected to go way before Quinyon Mitchell did in the first round at 22 and Cooper DeJean in the second round, but because of addressing a major problem for the Philadelphia Eagles. Their secondary was way below par compared to their Super Bowl season. It fell off a lot. It ticked off a lot of fans. A lot of people weren't content with how James Bradbury in specific played really down that stretch there to end the year, capping it off with being benched in the Tampa Bay game. Really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. So what do the Eagles do? What does Howie Roseman do? They go out in the draft, and there was talks about moving up with the Broncos and just trading up in general to grab Quinyon Mitchell. That was their top prospect on their board. And not being able to do that, the Broncos decided to draft Bo Nix. And then everybody else behind them still having the opportunity. I thought Quinyon could have gone to the Raiders potentially, the Colts, maybe even at 17 with the Vikings by trading up again. But none of those teams decided to take him. He slides all the way into the 20s, and even the Steelers could have taken him if they really felt like it, but they decided to address the left tackle position. So Quinyon Mitchell was just sitting there, basically, for the Eagles to just fall in their lap. And Cooper DeJean, same story. People thought this could be a first-round pick. He slides to the second round. All props to the Eagles for trading up and snagging him in the second round, not really waiting around to do so. And one thing that most people might not know if they didn't follow the draft is that Howie Roseman might not have traded up, but he traded a record 8 times, tying the record 8 times in the draft. And I thought I would point this out just because it might not have led to some big move, some big steal, but it just continues to set the Eagles up later on in future drafts. They were able to accumulate more picks in this draft, but also in 2025, and that's how you see really established teams and successful teams continue to build, continue to prepare for the worst in case they need those draft picks, and just having them as a surplus in case they want to move up or just move around the draft. So props to the Eagles and Howie Roseman for continuing to execute in the draft and executing at their jobs as well. And then just my last team here that I thought had a very solid draft was the Washington Commanders. For a few reasons. Obviously, drafting Jaden Daniels at number 2, there was a lot of late rumors and rumblings that, it could be Drake May, maybe J.J. McCarthy slides in there. It was a little bit uneasy after that big top 30 visit that they had with all the quarterbacks and all those prospects. Jaden Daniels' agent was caught off guard by it. There was some maybe unease there that could have led to people believing that Jaden Daniels might not want to go there, and just there might have been some bad feelings there, but they didn't overthink it. Jaden Daniels was the second best quarterback in this draft, undoubtedly for me, and they needed a quarterback with this much talent and potential in Jaden Daniels, not just throwing it, but running it. I think he fits them perfectly, and it just adds on to what they did in free agency, continuing their good work to add to the defensive side of the ball, the offensive side of the ball, and just revolutionizing this team under Cliff Kingsbury, under Dan Quinn, and then just changing everything as they have. I think it's a very good sign for the Commanders. And in the second round, drafting Jerzon Newton, as well as Mike Sanders, probably my favorite prospect in this draft. Mike Sanders, that is. I watched a lot of Michigan, especially into the playoffs, and just seeing him play, he's definitely not the biggest guy out there. Probably weighs 180, no more than 190, soaking wet. But he just plays hard, and he's just has a nose for the ball. Made a big play in the national championship against Washington, having that interception. And on top of that, I'm not the only one that's noticed it. Nick Saban on the draft coverage when Sanders got drafted, he said that he believed that he was the best pound-for-pound player in the draft. Plays mostly out of the slot, and it's just an absolute menace there in the secondary. They're able to move him around. I think this is a perfect player for Dan Quinn, being a defensive coach, having a guy like this, the endless opportunities for him to take advantage of his talents. I really wanted the Steelers to draft him, but he was taken one pick before, and the Steelers went with Zach Frazier. But Mike Sanders, I think, one of the best players in this draft, and definitely one of my favorites, if not my favorite player overall in this draft. And going to the Commanders, I think that's a very good job by them to do so. And in all honesty, a lot of teams had good picks, good draft classes, and I just wanted to mention other ones that were very solid as well. The Los Angeles Rams, bringing in guys like Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, Blake Corum, and Cameron Kitchens, all mostly on the defensive side of the ball, except Corum, to add to that young core that they had. I really liked what they did. The Los Angeles Chargers solidifying their tackle position with Joe Alt, with Rashawn Slater, bringing in Junior Colson to reunite him with Jim Harbaugh. I think makes total sense to establish some sort of leadership and identity on that defensive side of the ball, as well as Ladd McConkey as well, going at the start of the second round, adding to that wide receiver group. And the last team I wanted to mention, or second to last, is the Chiefs. Xavier Worthy. It always has to be Xavier Worthy. This was a match made in heaven for me. Too obvious not to mention. The Chiefs get a lot better with adding him. And just lastly, the Arizona Cardinals. No-brainer at number 4, bringing in Marvin Harrison. Then you bring in Darius Robinson and add Trey Benson and Max Melton to the defensive side of the ball. In Melton, a very good slot corner. Could have potential to play on the outside, but regardless, very high on Max Melton out of Rutgers. I think would right away fit into that secondary, contribute right away, and Jonathan Gannon being a defensive-minded coach as well. I think he's a player that Max Melton would fit very well in, and it's not going to change their defense right away. They're not going to compete right away, but all these picks are very solid foundation to what a team like the Cardinals can certainly build on, as well as the Chargers not fitting right into the best of situations. All these picks I thought were great for all these teams, but the first 3 teams were my top teams. A lot of teams had very solid picks. This was a very talented draft class, and in saying that, a lot of teams got it right, but some teams might have gotten it wrong, and we're going to talk about that later in the show. But for now, we're going to go into a quick break, and on the other side, we're actually going to talk about the 49ers and some trade rumors that started circling around the league during the draft and leading up to the draft, after the first round, and them selecting a wide receiver, how that sparked trade rumors around Deebo Samuel and even more around Brandon Ayuk. So stick around and find out what was said and what went into all those trade talks. We'll be right back after this first break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be be the greatest. Everybody on their face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the show, on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, to talk more about the draft, specifically with the San Francisco 49ers, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel now being involved in these trade talks around the 49ers, and them situating their wide receiver position has been a growing topic around the NFL. I don't have to mention too much of the Brandon Ayuk, trade talks around him, not being satisfied with the contract extension that they're trying to negotiate. But John Lynch has said that one thing that he wants to do is try and sign Brandon Ayuk, and he's a lot more positive about it, but Brandon Ayuk and his agent are saying or denying rumors, not really giving updates on anything that's going on. And with the draft finalizing this past weekend, there was a good amount of traction that was gained around these rumors after the first round, really, because the 49ers selected Florida wide receiver Ricky Pearsall with the 31st overall pick, and immediately the first thing people think of is, this has to be insurance for Brandon Ayuk to seek a trade elsewhere. They might have finally given in to Brandon Ayuk and releasing him. Well, not releasing him, but releasing him in terms of letting him explore trades and just giving up on the fact that they could extend him. That's right away what people thought. But something that just blindsided me, really, was that these Deebo Samuel trade rumors started to pick up. And, you think of Deebo, you think of Brock Purdy, Fred Warner. These are the guys that I thought the 49ers, don't even look at those guys because we're not trading those. I thought they were at that level with Deebo and everything that he could do. I don't have to go in and explain how much he brings to their offense. It's well known around the NFL what he brings. But a lot of these rumors started really picking up really from last Tuesday before the NFL draft, when the San Francisco Chronicle's Mike Silver reported that Deebo was assured by the 49ers that he wouldn't be traded during or after the NFL draft. And then everything just sort of changed in a whirlwind. And on Thursday, during the first round of the NFL draft, the Athletic's Diana Russini reported that San Francisco actually explored and inquired a little bit about moving Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel both for something in the first round, to have them move up in the first round. Allegedly, that was the report from Diana Russini. She also tweeted out that same day that she said, "I spoke with Deebo Samuel on the phone and asked his reaction to the 49ers drafting of his potential replacement and to the reports that they explored trading him." Deebo Samuel said, "I know what's going on," he said, "but it is what it is. I'm good with them. I'm chilling." That's what Deebo said. That's what Diana Russini's tweet read on Thursday after the 49ers selection and everything like that. Deebo then seemed to dispel or just go completely against what Diana Russini tweeted that day on his Instagram story, sort of poking fun of it, alleging to the fact that it might not be true at all, laughing at it a little bit. But that was all right away on Thursday and into Friday, heading into the second round. Then again, the San Francisco Chronicle claimed that the Pittsburgh Steelers had an offer for Deebo Samuel from the 49ers on top of it all. But in the end, the Steelers refused to accept this trade proposal from the 49ers because the asking price from them was too high for them. And if you followed, the Steelers are not shy about letting everybody know that they are interested in bringing in another receiver. They drafted Roman Wilson, but even still, it's still reported that they are on the lookout for some. They've mentioned Cortland Sutton. They've been linked to Brandon Ayuk as well. Now with Deebo Samuel potentially being available, the San Francisco Chronicle reported that they being the Steelers, actually reached out to the 49ers, seeing where they stood on Deebo. The asking price was too high, as it should be for Deebo Samuel, so the Steelers turned away from that. But even still, that interest is still there. There's too much movement around this whole situation for me to feel easy and completely feel like, nothing is going on here between the 49ers and their receivers. But also, after the conclusion of the second day of the draft, John Lynch really came out and clarified everything from their standpoint, saying that they didn't entertain any of that being the trade rumors and those reports on that day in the first round. And he also mentioned that they were more than happy with their wide receiver group, adding Ricky Pearsall to it. They're very excited about it. And I would probably tend to agree with him, because you look at Ricky Pearsall, one of the more underrated guys in this draft, out of Florida, not really having the eye-popping numbers that some of these top three receivers had. You look at Marvin, Rome, Malik Neighbors, all putting up, being in the top three, and really just gaining all this national attention from really the whole of college football, with Marvin Harrison at Ohio State. The longest of time was the number one receiver. He was pro-ready. He's the son of Marvin Harrison Sr., so all of that all kind of tied into it. Malik Neighbors as well, bursting onto the scene with Jaden Daniels. Rome Odunze, the kind of season that he had with Michael Penix, going to the national championship. Then you have Ricky Pearsall, who at Florida had a struggling year there with the Gators, but had a lot of good plays, showed a lot of good tape on film. And people around the league, a lot of teams, a lot of scouts, if you look on the internet or wherever you get your information, had pretty high grades on Ricky Pearsall. They were a lot higher on him than most people tuning into the draft would be if they weren't aware of him whatsoever. And me, seeing those, I went to check it out. He seems like a solid receiver, the kind of receiver that the 49ers would have success with. And I think he could definitely contribute to them right away. If you look at their wide receiver group, you have Deebo Samuel currently there on his contract, Brandon Ayuk on his fifth-year deal. Juwan Jennings showed a lot of good moments last year in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl as well, being another underrated receiver for the 49ers. Now you add Ricky Pearsall. I think those four have the potential to be probably the most well-rounded, balanced, talented group of wide receivers in the NFC, definitely. And you can make an argument for the entire NFL because of what Deebo can do. Brandon Ayuk breaking out this past year. Juwan Jennings, another good underrated receiver. And Ricky Pearsall, who a lot of people were high on. I think this has the potential to be one of the best groups, but because of the Brandon Ayuk situation, Deebo Samuel now being involved in these trade rumors, and not to mention Juwan Jennings, I mentioned had a very good season, end of season last year. He has technically not signed his restricted free agent tender, so there is a little bit of doubt there on how that's going to be resolved. Ayuk's on his fifth-year deal, needs a contract extension. Deebo is in the middle of his 3-year, $71 million extension he signed in 2022. But the end of that is not too far off in distance there. So, it's not like these receivers are signed for another 3-4 years right away. The 49ers have to start thinking about, especially with Ayuk, how to resolve this so you can keep this group together, so you can have all four contribute. Because last year in the Super Bowl, you saw how offensively they had those duds to start the second half, and because of that, I truly believe that they weren't able to win that Super Bowl. To start that second half the way that they did, I think ultimately cost them in the end. And because they really didn't get anything going, they overused Christian McCaffrey a lot towards the end of last season. And you can see how much of a toll that took on him because Brock and the receivers might not have contributed as much as McCaffrey. He was dealing with a calf. He was in and out of the snaps, the plays, and he kind of struggled to continue that exceptional rhythm that he was on. Adding Ricky Pearsall now, another weapon, can create more of that balance between the passing game, plus Brock Purdy having another year of experience. It would all make this team even better, if that was even possible before then, to have another great year, another great offense, and really just help Brock Purdy develop with another weapon. But all that being said, with all of this smoke that's being created around really Brandon Ayuk, I find it overall hard to believe that all four of these receivers start training camp, start the season, preseason, all on the 49ers. I just find it hard to believe. It's really difficult for me to be convinced by what John Lynch says, what Kyle Shanahan says, because I just believe that all general managers would say stuff like that. It's going great. The negotiations are in a good place. We have good dialogue. You've all heard it before with, for example, Justin Jefferson. It seemed all positive last offseason with how the Vikings were talking about it. Nothing gets done. Now you're still pretty much into May already, and no deal has been finalized with Justin Jefferson and how good he is. So that is really not convincing for me from the 49ers with Ayuk really trying to figure out his situation. Now you have Debo involved in it. People are going to continue to ask him about it. It's something to watch out for. And I just believe that one of these guys is not going to end up on this team. Sure, they can keep three of them, probably Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, and Debo. I think still Brandon Ayuk. I know I predicted him to be moved during the draft. That didn't end up happening, but still, I think there's too much smoke here for nothing really to be happening. You've seen it in situations where there were talks. Stephon Diggs, one of the best examples. There was talks and talks and talks about the Bills and him not really being satisfied with it, having some trouble, some problems within the locker room, him and Josh Allen, how's their relationship, and then ultimately he gets traded. There was always that smoke there, and it ended up being something. He gets moved on, and that's that. The same thing goes in other situations as well. It's not the first time this has happened, and I just think if they haven't signed a deal yet and it continues on this path through mid-May, even June, I think there's no chance Ayuk, maybe another receiver, stays on this team. But those trade talks have now really started to surface, now carrying over to Deebo Samuel. I don't buy it from the Deebo side of things, but with Brandon, I think it's just really not if, but when he gets moved, just so the 49ers can move on from this. It doesn't seem positive for them, and it's unfortunate because I would be very excited about this wide receiver group, but, unfortunately, just in my opinion, it doesn't seem like this all get worked out for the 49ers. It'll be interesting to see where he goes, but, that all depends on the time and how this all develops. Still very slow, but I expect it to happen at the end of the day. But in saying that, we'll leave it there. And in the meantime, we'll carry on with today's show. 2 more topics to talk about on today's episode. After the break, we're going to get into more of the Falcons' selection of Michael Penix, what their general manager said, and more on what I believe around the situation, how it all developed between Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix, as well as Zeke making his illustrious return to the Dallas Cowboys. I'll talk about the details of that and what I believe could it just mean for the Cowboys and Zeke going forward. So stick around, a lot more to talk about on today's episode. We'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Moving on with today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, going back to a topic I touched on briefly last week, and that was the Michael Penix situation. Now, their general manager, Terry Fontenot, spoke more on the selection of Michael Penix, same with Raheem Morris, and of course they backed it. They explained their reasoning around him. You know, when he was selected number 8, I think a lot of people were very surprised, to say the least. You know, everybody thought it was a pass rusher. I really thought it should have been. Of course, they addressed it later on. I think their next 4 to 5 picks were defensive players, but just the value you get at number 8 with a Dallas Turner, with a Latu, I just thought you couldn't really envision them getting back there and having another opportunity to draft a top 10 defensive player because of the way that they project themselves being, how good they're going to be with Kirk, with a new quarterback. You're not going to be picking in the top 10, regardless if you want a quarterback or a defensive player. I thought it was a great opportunity to draft a stalwart at the defensive side of the ball, but they decided to ensure their future going forward at the quarterback position. Why wouldn't you? You know, the most important position, arguably, in all of sports. So that was really the main basis of their argument from the Falcons, their general manager, and Raheem Morris. One thing that was brought up around this whole situation is how Kirk would respond to it. You know, his agent came out with a statement saying that he was really caught off guard by the Michael Penix situation. They didn't have a conversation. They didn't run it by him. And, you know, there were some weird feelings there around Kirk. You know, you sign a massive deal, $160, $180 million for 4 years, and you'd expect if the Falcons, which is really my main just quarrel with all of this, you spend a lot of money on Kirk, and then to invest that much money and then try and find another quarterback, regardless if you really like him, if you really liked Michael Penix, you wouldn't spend that much money on Kirk. You know, there was other options out there. Gardner Minshew signed with the Raiders. Jacoby Brissett signed a cheap deal with the Patriots. I don't see the problem with getting one of those guys. If you really, really loved Michael Penix and were always going to go with him, you could have saved a lot of money by going with those other guys if you were still going to draft Michael Penix. But on Friday, after the first round, Atlanta general manager Terry Fontenot talked more about their draft pick and the reasoning behind it. And he said, if you believe in a quarterback, you have to take him. And if he sits for 4 or 5 years, that's a great problem to have because we're doing well at that position. Now, he said that, and I have a few problems personally just with the way that he said it, and specifically with what he said there, as you can see on the title, sitting 4 to 5 years and saying that, you know, believe. He used the word believe. If you believe in a quarterback, you have to take him. What does he mean by, you know, believe? If you believed in Michael Penix, you probably, again, wouldn't have spent $160, $180 million on Kirk Cousins. If you really wanted Michael Penix to be your guy, be the guy, the quarterback to move into the next 5, 6 years and so on, you can't tell me you would spend that much money on Kirk Cousins, because if Michael Penix comes in, you have that huge amount of money just sitting on the bench there. And if Kirk Cousins starts, you spend a first-round pick on a quarterback that's ready to play right now. In my opinion, if he signed with the Raiders or the Broncos, he would be their number one guy, and he'd be ready to play right away because he is also 24 years old. So now you're in a situation that it has never really seen before. You know, you have these quarterbacks sometimes that are drafted, and it leaves a lot of people surprised, like Jordan Love being selected to the Packers while they still have Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, again, being selected while they have Brett Favre. And even in this year, Drake May being selected when they brought in Jacoby Brissett. You have those situations, right? And that's a situation I could fully get behind and support. Having a rookie quarterback, a young quarterback with time to learn what it is to be an NFL pro. You have that time because they're 21, 20, 22 years old. They could sit for 2 to 3 years behind a veteran and then be ready to jump into this whole crazy situation that is the NFL. But the difference here is Michael Penix is 24 years old. So by saying now another part of Terry Fontenot's quote, sitting 4 to 5 years, I know he probably didn't mean it literally, but that is an idea if Kirk Cousins plays very well. Say he sits 3 years, now he's 27 years old, and he really hasn't had, if Kirk plays very well, to hold off Michael Penix for 3 years legitimately, he'll be 27 years old without having any real NFL reps, and then you have to work him in. I'm sure it'll probably go smoother than working in a younger quarterback, but at that point, after 4 to 5 years, he'll be 27, maybe 28 years old. And how could you? He'd be coming up on a contract extension at that point. Of course, you have the 5th-year option, but most rookie deals are 4 years with that 5th-year option for first-round picks. After that time, how could you think about extending him with Kirk being 38, 39 years old, and then you bring in Michael Penix after 4 to 5 years, like Terry Fontenot said? How could you think about extending Michael Penix and giving Michael Penix a contract that he would want if he hasn't had the necessary reps to learn and prove that he's earned that sort of contract at 27, 28 years old? He'll be coming up on an extension. Now you're left in a situation where, well, we had a good thing going with Kirk. Now he's, sort of moving on and declining. We'll just bring in Michael Penix without really knowing and seeing him in live action. Of course, he'll get live reps in preseason now. Maybe if Kirk gets injured again or isn't playing up to par, he could get in. But the way that they've laid this out, the way that they have these expectations for Kirk Cousins, for a quarterback that you signed for so much money, and think that Michael Penix is just going to come in and replace him because he plays better, I just think this wasn't really thought out too much. And again, this hasn't really happened before. A team signs a $100 million quarterback and they still draft a replacement for him. It's been similar situations with, like I mentioned, Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers, but the difference there was Jordan Love was 21 years old and he sat for 3 years, and then when he was 24 he came in, had that experience learning behind one of the best, and you saw the fruits of that by in his first year coming in, leading them to the playoffs and having great success because he had that downtime to get better and develop as a quarterback. Same thing with Rodgers, same thing I expect to happen with Drake May, but time is really not on their side with Michael Penix and Kirk Cousins, plus just the fact going back to them using a top 10 pick on Michael Penix to come in and be that eventual starter. They don't have the time because Michael Penix is already 24 years old, and you spent a lot more valuable pick on your future quarterback, where instead the Packers used the late 20s pick. Rodgers was drafted in the 20s as well, and it's just confusing for me to understand this reasoning. I can see why, you want to make sure you have good players there. Again, I want to state, as I did back on Friday, I think it was, I truly believe Michael Penix is a great player. The arm talent that he has, the accuracy most of all. He is a very good player. I'm a very big fan of him. But it just, I don't want to say a shame because, it's not a shame that he got drafted, but it's just a little upsetting to me because he could step in right away to any other team, arguably, and be their starting quarterback, and I would have loved to have seen him just step in right away. I thought he was ready. The experience he has, the injury history is there, but I thought he could step in right away and learn as he goes and just get the experience right away with owning a team, with making a team that drafted him his own. But now with Kirk there, it's going to always be brought up. If Kirk has a bad game, 3 or 4 bad games, how do they approach Kirk Cousins? Do they ask Michael Penix about it? How does Raheem Morris answer to that? There could be a lot of distractions there and a lot of things outside of football that get in the way of it. But it was a good sign to see Kirk Cousins reach out to Michael Penix and say whatever he did say. He didn't disclose that, but Michael Penix said that they had a good conversation and there seems to be no awkwardness there between Kirk and Penix. So ideally for the Falcons, this would work out sort of to motivate Kirk Cousins, and then you get the most out of him, the most out of that money you've invested in him. That's ideal, and then Michael Penix can come in. But the biggest problem with me is this sort of turns into a Tua Tagovailoa situation almost with the Miami Dolphins. You look at that situation, and Tua comes in, becomes a starter, gets hurt, has a couple years where, there is some doubt there with the concussions and all the injuries. But then this past year, he has a very, very impressive season, was in the MVP conversation for a good part of that first half of the year, and then it ends how it ends, right? But regardless, he put up great numbers, and now the Dolphins are coming into a contract extension period, not seeing too much from Tua. He has one good year, but because of things obviously that they couldn't control, which is another thing that the Falcons, I just don't think, thought of with Tua and his situation. Now, not a lot of tape out there for the Dolphins to say, he's been consistent in the NFL, starting game, season after season. Let's extend him. Now, instead, the Dolphins are thinking, well, he had one good year, but is he going to get hurt again? What if it was just I don't want to say a fluke, but what if it was just one really good year and then the rest of his time with the Dolphins is up and down, pretty average? And the Dolphins right now really don't know what to do with Tua. They could extend him, not extend him, well, they could extend him, but they could franchise tag him if they don't really know what to do. It just seems like they're in a 50-50 spot with Tua where they're still vying for their options, not really knowing what to go off of because he's only had one good year. Similarly with this situation, Kirk, like I mentioned before, plays 3 years, then Michael Penix comes in, then he's due for an extension that next year. How can you base any sort of contract off of one good year when maybe he gets hurt? He's had a lot of ACL injuries, shoulder injuries as well. What if he gets hurt again? What if he doesn't play well? What if the team just changes over the years as well? You lose some pieces here or there. The offensive line gets worse. A lot of things can change from year to year in the NFL. To just think Michael Penix can step in and just carry on what Kirk did, I think is a bit hopeful and almost unrealistic to a point. And again, I don't want to say that it was a problem that Michael Penix got drafted. I just think he didn't fit into the right situation where he can step in right away and just really overall compete with some of these guys like Caleb, like JJ, maybe not so much Drake, but Bo Nix, all these guys that were projected and did go ahead of him. He doesn't get the opportunity now to go out there and show everybody why he was really a good guy and why he really should have been in conversations with being the second best quarterback, maybe the best quarterback. You never know how it would have turned out this year because now most likely he's going to be sitting for most of that season, his first couple seasons behind Kirk because of all that money they paid him, because Kirk is coming off a very good year. A lot of people will forget because of that Achilles injury. If he didn't get that, he probably would have had his best year of his career. I expect that to carry on. I'm sure the Falcons did because they gave him all that money. So now, on top of it all, Michael Penix doesn't get the opportunity to show why he could have been maybe the best quarterback taken in this draft, He won't get the chance to prove that right away. And maybe by the time he does, he'll be 27, 28 years old, and that's not really ideal. But there's always the chance, right? Kirk gets hurt and he comes in. You don't want to wish that, but it's a lot of maybes and ifs with this whole situation, not a lot of guarantees. That I think drafting a defensive player certainly would have given you a guarantee that it would have been better than what you've had going these last few years on that defensive side of the ball. They're one of the worst in pass rush win rate. They don't get a lot of sacks, and it's just hard on their secondary and all their defense overall to try and limit teams to 15, 20 points. If they have no pass rush, then there's more pressure on the offense as well. I expect them to be better because they have a better quarterback, but it's hard to say they could get to where they want to get with no real defensive pressure, no real proven talent on that side of the ball. But, what can they do about it now? It's a decision that they might live to regret, or they might surprise a lot of people. As of right now, I think there's more doubts about it. We're just going to have to see how it all plays out. But certainly I'm confused by it still. I could accept the reasoning, but, it all has to just depend on how it all plays out and how, maybe other players turn out as well. And then we could determine how good of a choice this was later down the road. But for right now, we'll leave it there, and we're going to move on with the show. One more topic to cover, the most recent news of them all. Ezekiel Elliott returns to the team that drafted him in Dallas on a one-year deal. I'll give you all the details to that and my thoughts overall on what the Dallas Cowboys are doing at the running back position. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and I mentioned the topic on Zeke. Before I get to that, I want to remind you guys one last time on today's show, if you have any questions or concerns to use, or not concerns, questions or comments, to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, your questions pop up on my chat box. I can read them out on air and address them, carry the conversation maybe in a different direction, get a different perspective. All that, I think, makes it more engaging and more fun. And also, it's a massive help for this show if you're able to do that with any question or comment. So again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. And actually, what I just got on my phone, I've been waiting actually a good amount of time to use this on this show. Officially coming in from Adam Schefter, we got some breaking news today, just live on this show. I've been waiting a long time to use that. It might not be the biggest news, but it is some breaking news that I just got on my phone. Former wide receiver Michael Gallup of formerly the Dallas Cowboys, which plays right into this situation and this topic. Michael Gallup plans to sign a one-year deal worth up to $3 million with the Las Vegas Raiders. So, breaking news today on this show to end it on a topic that we were already going to discuss around the Dallas Cowboys. Their former wide receiver Michael Gallup now makes his way over to the Las Vegas Raiders. Not the biggest of news, but it is still breaking news. I've wanted to use that for a while, so I got that opportunity. But Ezekiel Elliott, now the topic of conversation with the Dallas Cowboys. It was announced this morning that he will be back in Dallas on a one-year, $3 million deal with $2 million guaranteed, according to Clarence Hill of the Star-Telegram. And this could all be traced back to last week when Zeke's agent and himself met with the Dallas Cowboys, and comments coming from Jerry Jones as well last week saying that he believed that Zeke could still be a starting caliber running back in the NFL. And all of that just came out with reports about this situation being very close to being finalized, as I'm sure I mentioned last week, or over this past week, and that this was sort of just one step away from finalizing, and now pending a physical, he has to pass that. Zeke should be back in a Dallas Cowboys uniform now after a year or two being removed from leaving the Dallas Cowboys. He returns at 27 years old to the team that first drafted him 4th overall in 2016. He spent 7 seasons with the Dallas Cowboys. Very good 6 seasons, 6 to 7 seasons actually, with the Dallas Cowboys. On that rookie deal, and specifically as a rookie in his first year, exceptional season from Zeke. 1,600 yards over that, 15 touchdowns on 322 carries, and since then he basically had 1,000 yards or a little bit under for the next 5 years, and he had no less than 6 touchdowns in any of his seasons, as well as averaging at least 237 carries in those next 5 years since he was a rookie. Then you trace it back to 2019. He signs that big extension in 2019, 6 years, $90 million, $50 million guaranteed, and earning an average salary of $15 million per year. One of the highest paid running backs in recent memory. I think only Christian McCaffrey makes that sort of money now. Saquon's probably the next highest paid, but he's about $12 million per year. So Zeke was really one of those last running backs to earn one of these massive deals from his team. And then, ironically, in 2019, the Cowboys actually drafted Tony Pollard. And since then, Zeke really didn't play awful since they drafted Tony Pollard for them to bring him in right away and think that, they had to get Zeke out the door. He still averaged around that same amount of yards, but everybody knows how it went. Drafting TP in 2019, then they release Ezekiel Elliott in 2022, and he signed a 1-year deal with the New England Patriots. And now we're at this point where the Cowboys bring him back when he's coming off of a season with a career low 642 total yards and averaging another career low in 3.5 yards per carry as well. Re-signing Zeke after Tony Pollard was also lost in free agency. He signs a deal with the Tennessee Titans to be their starting running back. And now, evaluating this decision, seeing the initial reports, then it's still lingering around with Zeke, not really going away. You kind of start to believe in your mind, of course the Dallas Cowboys would want Zeke back, and if I seem, pessimistic about it, not very happy about it, it's just because I still have some questions about it. I'll start with the positive sides at least. The Dallas offensive line is better than New England's. New England's offensive line last year wasn't great, and Zeke still averaged or got over 600 yards, averaged 3.5 yards per carry, both career lows for him, but, you're comparing that to the great seasons he had with the Dallas Cowboys offensive line and them being in their prime, Zeke being in his running back prime, per se. So that, comparing those two to now, Zeke earlier on to Zeke now, averaging 3.5 yards per carry isn't awful, and 600 yards behind that New England offensive line isn't that bad either, honestly. If you look at it and compare it to now, Tony Pollard barely broke 1,000 yards with this Dallas offensive line, and I know they lost some pieces in the offseason and they're bringing in young and more inexperienced pieces, but it's not like Tony Pollard was averaging over 1,300 yards, total yards, rushing and receiving, getting 10 touchdowns, 12 touchdowns. It was a lot closer with Zeke at this point in his career than obviously it was in his prime. So Tony Pollard, with what he was able to do, and Zeke as well currently, wasn't too far off, so you can kind of hope there, have some optimism that you might not have this giant decline like some people might expect. So it could be close there. You could still be receiving some of the same production out of that position. And overall, with what they had in that running back room, adding Zeke, I think, is unquestionably, the right decision for what they had in that locker room. Zeke is obviously going to be the starter now. They couldn't really roll with any of those guys in that room, so bringing in a guy like Zeke, he knows the organization, he knows what's expected of him, he's familiar with everybody and what they're trying to do. He's going to be the starter, so that makes sense. You improved technically at that position, but what is questioning for me, and still trying to figure this out, is that the idea of signing Zeke, and there was reports, ideas that the Cowboys could, go out and draft a running back in any of the rounds. There was a lot of good talent that you could find later in the second round, third round, potentially. I thought that's what they were going to do. That made sense to me. You bring in a young running back, low miles on his tires, and on a cheap deal as well, not to mention. You bring him in, and that's pretty ideal for what you have. Other than the experience factor, I think it's still an improvement. To bring in Zeke, 27 years old, I'm sure he's going to be 28, on a cheap deal, it's just puzzling because, how much better is Zeke going to be compared to a young running back, not as many miles, and probably costing a little bit more, $6 million, $5 million per year rather than $3 million. If money wasn't the problem, if production really wasn't going to be that much better than what Zeke could give you and a young running back could give you, I probably still would have opted for drafting a running back, whoever it was, rather than Zeke, because with a young running back as well, you have that potential, that ceiling that they could exceed. You don't know how well they're going to be in the NFL without seeing how they get accustomed to it. With Zeke, it already seems like he's reached his max. It seems like you've seen the best years of Zeke already in the past with the Dallas Cowboys, but now you bring him back, and how much more can you really expect from Zeke, not to mention now that he's older, has more traction on his tires. With a rookie running back, there was that potential that he could be great, a lot fresher and cheap as well. I probably would have opted with that as well, drafting a rookie rather than bringing in Zeke. But again, it's still an improvement with what they had in that position group. And just the last thing around Zeke and returning to the Dallas Cowboys, I mentioned that offensive line before. Before when Zeke was there, a whole different offensive line. They were younger. They were really in the prime of their years with Zeke, 2019 through 2021. But now they lost Tyron Smith, they lost Biotic, and it still remains a major doubt for me going forward with Stephen Jones, Jerry Jones, opting to not really draft too many offensive linemen, or they did draft, I want to say, one or two, but still not a lot of experience now from that group. You still have Zach Martin, Tyler Smith, but Tyler Smith might play in a position that doesn't suit him just to accommodate all the other young offensive linemen that you need. And now you have some questions around the offensive line. How will that affect not only Dak and this offense, but Zeke coming in at 28 years old? He doesn't have those young legs that he did back when he was 20, 21 years old. Now at this point in his career, he depends more on a very solid, established offensive line than he did back when he was first drafted out of Ohio State. He could make something out of nothing, and his talent and just his youth really got him out of a lot of situations. Now, I think you would have needed a lot better offensive line to bring in Zeke for me to look at this situation and think, all right, well, if Zeke isn't going to, provide too much physically and doesn't have it like he used to back then, the offensive line is good enough to create holes for Zeke to still be productive. Now there's some doubts around that, and I don't think those two really match up well. If Zeke can't create his own space, relies on the offensive line, and the offensive line not really knowing too well what they're doing out there because they just have no experience, I think I have doubts around that. But on the positive side, this might not be all dire for the Cowboys. And then just to wrap it up, they are still reportedly looking for other options. Analysts out there still believe that they will make a move maybe for another running back and how it all shakes out in free agency. going forward. But as of right now, with Zeke being your starting running back, it is an improvement, but I still have my doubts. With Zeke being your starting running back, again, the big goal is all in, trying to get over that hump in the playoffs, win a playoff game. With this being Dak's maybe last year, Mike McCarthy's last year, a lot of questions outside of just the running back. Bringing in Zeke, I don't think gets you to that point and to your ultimate goal. So, how significant really is this deal? It is news because he's returning to the Cowboys, but to reach that ultimate goal that everybody wants the Cowboys to, or at least that the Dallas Cowboy fans want to reach, I don't think that really moves the needle too much for me. But let me know what you guys think in the comments or in the chat box as well. What are your guys' thoughts on Zeke making a comeback to Dallas? Do you think it's huge? Do you think it doesn't really move the needle too much for you? Leave that all down below in the comments so I can read them and interact with you guys. But that will do it for today's episode of the show. I want to thank you guys all for listening and tuning in to today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube, where there's YouTube Shorts posted every weekday. The full live recorded shows are all on there for you to watch back, as well as individual segment videos if you missed out on a segment or want to rewatch a specific part. They're all on there as well. Make sure to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more football discussions and conversations around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host. Thanking you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you all back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.